Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girvaradari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girvaradari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnupada Paramhamsa Pravirajkacharya Ashtotrashata Shri His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupada Paramhamsa Pravirajkacharya Ashtotrashata Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda Ki Gaur Premanande all Guru assembled devotees, all Guru assembled devotees, all Guru Shri Guru Gauranga Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 3, chapter 30, verse number 15. Āste avamatyā upanyastam gṛha-pāla ivāharan āmayāvī apradīpta-agniḥ alpāhāro lpa-ceṣṭitaḥ. So the first line is like a combination of 3 words. So we'll try to combine it together and chant it. Āste vamatyopanyastaṁ. Yeah. Should we do it together or should we break it into 2? Should we do it together? Okay. Āste vamatyopanyastaṁ gṛha-pāla ivāharan āmayāvī apradīpta-agnir alpāhāro lpa-ceṣṭitaḥ. Āste vamatyopanyastaṁ gṛha-pāla ivāharan āmayāvī apradīptāgnir alpāhāro alpa-ceṣṭitaḥ. āste vamatyopanyastaṁ gṛha-pāla ivāharan āmayāvy apradīpta-agniḥ alpāhāro lpa-ceṣṭitaḥ āste vamatyopanyastaṁ gṛha-pāla ivāharan āmayāvī apradīpta-agniḥ alpāhāro alpa-ceṣṭitaḥ. Mataji, āste, he remains. Avamatyā, negligently. Upanyastam, what is placed. Gṛha-pālaḥ, a dog. Iva, like. Āharan, eating. Āmayāvī, deceased. Apradīpta-agniḥ, having dyspepsia. Alpa, little. Āhāraḥ, eating. Alpa, little. Ceṣṭitaḥ, his activity. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Translation: thus he remains at home just like a pet dog and eats whatever is so negligently given to him. Afflicted with many diseases such as dyspepsia and loss of appetite, he eats only very small morsels of food, and he becomes an invalid who cannot work anymore. Purport: before meeting death, one is sure to become a diseased invalid, and when he is neglected by his family members, his life becomes less than a dog's because he is put into so many miserable conditions. The Vedic literatures, therefore, enjoin that before the arrival of such miserable conditions, one should leave home and die without the knowledge of his family members. If a man leaves the home and dies without his family's knowing, that is considered to be a glorious death. But an attached family man wants his family members to carry him in a great procession even after his death. And although he will not be able to see how the procession goes, he still desires that his body be taken gorgeously in procession. Thus, he is happy without even knowing where he has to go when he leaves his body for the next life. Thus ends the purport. Om Ajñāntimirandasya Jñānāñjana-śalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this example or an comparison to a dog, I mean these examples are given by Lord Kapila thousands of years back. I don't know if it is still applicable now, because now dogs are taken care even better than human beings, right? Now they're not like neglected the way it is being described here. So, especially in the US, right? The dogs have their own diet, their own doctors, their own treatments, right? They are taken as good as human beings. But here, I mean, interestingly, this example is actually from maybe Satyayuga. Maybe even in Satyayuga, dogs are, neglected, I guess. I don't know about that, but. So, basically, this is showing the behavior of a materialistic person, which where he basically becomes attached to his house even when he's not treated properly by his own family members, that he stays like a dog. Basically dog, what do you mean dog? Dog is basically, in India, the dogs are usually kept outside the house and they eat also outside the house. So it kind of shows it's like some negligence. So that is why the comparison is made to a dog, that even though a person is neglected or not given as much respect as he deserves, but he still becomes attached to his house and stays at his house without any shame. Because, but generally, if you see, let's say if someone insults you, right, or says something bad to you, and the general human nature is that you not talk to him anymore. I mean, everybody has some self-respect, right? They have, but so they, sometimes you see people when they fight, they don't talk to each other for many days. Just a small thing, not a big thing. Just for a small fight also, people don't talk to each other. But here we see, which doesn't really make much sense, that a person is being treated so neglectfully, but he still stays at his house. That means there must be some strong reason why he's still staying at his house, even though he's being so neglected, right? So that is something which is very interesting, which doesn't really make sense, but there should be some reason why he's still staying at his house and attached to his family members, right? So I like to quote a verse in this regard from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Prabhupada actually quotes Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in many occasions, in Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. In many locations he quotes this Upanishad. And does anyone know any famous verse from this Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad? There is this verse, Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamosoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritangamaya, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this very famous verse is actually from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Prabhupada quotes in Chaitanya Charitamrita and many other books. So in the same Upanishad, in chapter number 2, there is a conversation between sage Yajnavalkya and his wife Maitreyi. Actually, he has two wives. One is Maitreyi and other is Katyayini. Maitreyi is the elder wife. So this sage Yajnavalkya, he decides that now he wants to renounce his family life and he wants to go to the forest. And in order to do so, he divides whatever property he has equally between his two wives. Because he has two wives, so he divides it equally between the two wives. And the second wife is satisfied, she's happy, because she's confident that she can take care of herself. But the first wife tells to sage Yajnavalkya that, see, you are giving up this wealth so easily and you are going for something else. So that means that you are pursuing something which is even more valuable than the wealth, than the material wealth, right? So now that is where Maitreyi says, I don't want this wealth. I want that wealth which you are going after, because that should be something which is more superior than this material wealth. Then sage Yajnavalkya is very much pleased by the first wife's reply, and there is a long conversation. And in one of the verse in that conversation is this verse. It says, Navare patyu kama patih priyo bhavati, atmamshu kamaya patih priyo bhavati. Navare jayati kamaya jaya priya bhavati, atmamshu kamaya jaya priya bhavati. Navare putram kamaya putraha priya bhavati, atmamshu kamaya putraha priya bhavati. So this is verse which is spoken by sage Yajnavalkya, which basically says that The husband becomes dear to the wife, not for the husband itself, but for one's own self. Wife becomes dear to the husband, not for the sake of wife itself, but for one's own self. The children becomes dear to the parent, not for the sake of children itself, but for one's own self. Right? I mean, this may appear a little bit selfish, right? You know, whenever someone reads this verse, it's just like, oh, I mean, that does mean there is no true love. I mean, everything is selfish, you know. Well, I mean, there is an explanation what you meant by here. Just for example, just a simple example. Let's say that you help somebody, right? You help somebody, and let's say that person will say thank you, right? He says thank you because you helped somebody. What do you reply? You're welcome. Any other reply? Okay, anytime, any other reply? Of course. And do you ever hear someone saying my pleasure? Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure that I'm helping you. So yeah, that is what my pleasure. My pleasure means atmāṁ kamāya. It's my pleasure that I'm helping you. The person is thinking that actually he is being helped, but actually it's my pleasure too to help him. So that's what exactly what it means. Atmāṁ kamāya patihi priyo bhavati. Maybe next time instead of saying my pleasure, you can say atma kamāya. It's the same thing, you know. It's for my own pleasure. So this is the ultimate thing. Whatever we do, whatever relationships we have, it's for our own pleasure. Even though it seems to be for others' pleasure, it's for one's own pleasure. That is what King Sage Yajnavalkya is saying by this verse. So, because ultimately, without pleasure, nobody does anything. Right? That is the ultimate thing. Everybody is looking for some pleasure. But of course, someone can say, you know, what about people who are sacrificing their lives for others' purpose? I mean, we see it like that, right? Like people who fight in the wars, or people who are like freedom fighters. They are not fighting for themselves. I mean, they are fighting for their country, right? So that seems to be selfless, apparently. But actually, Prabhupada says in one of the purport, actually that is not really selfless in one sense. The reason is because ultimately there is some satisfaction even in the sacrifice. You see? A sacrifice maybe looks to be you're sacrificing to somebody else, but even in that sacrifice there is pleasure. Otherwise nobody will even do sacrifice. Right? So in one of the purport in the 10th canto, Prabhupada writes that sometimes modern thinkers become puzzled when they study psychology of moral behavior. Although every living entity is inclined towards self-preservation, sometimes a person voluntarily sacrifices his own interest through philanthropic, patriotic, or other such activities, giving money to others. Such so-called selfless behavior apparently seems to contradict the self-preservation, right? But however, the living entity serves his own society, nation, family, and so on, only because these objects of affection represents the expansion of one's own self. It's your extended self. Your family is your extended self. Your nation is your extended self. So by serving the family, by serving the nation, actually you're serving your own self in that sense. So there is a self-interest in everything. There's a pleasure in every activity. That is why everybody acts. So now, if we look at this, the last line, which repeats itself every time, Atmāṁ kamāya patihi priyo bhavati. Atmāṁ means for one's own self. Kamāya means fulfillment. And priyo means becomes dear. So everything everybody does is just for one's own fulfillment, for one's own self. Now this word Atma, as you all know, can actually have three meanings, right? Atma means body, Atma means mind, Atma means soul, or Atma can also refer to Paramatma or super soul. So depending upon what meaning we take to this word Atma, the definition or the translation keeps changing. Say for example, let's say if the Atma refers to body, what does it mean? It is not due to the love of husband that a husband becomes dear, but it is to the satisfactions of one's own body that husband becomes dear. Say for example, let's say there is a brahmachari, right? The brahmachari can either go to sannyas or he can go to grihastha, right? So, but however, if a brahmachari decides that he's not able to stay in the brahmachari ashram, that he wants to take into the grihastha ashram, so ultimately there is some self-interest over there, that to satisfy one's own bodily demands, that one takes to the grihastha ashram, right? But of course, in a more cultured way, not like cats and dogs, just roaming around with other, intermixing with other gender, but it is out of one's own bodily demands, right? But of course, bodily needs doesn't mean that always the conjugal needs, but also, for example, when a person becomes old, he's also worried that now who will take care of me when I get deceased, right? That's a fear. Even a person becomes old, so that's a bodily demand, that's a bodily requirement a person needs. So a person may look for a companion to make sure that to take care of his own body in one sense. That is why it is said, it is not due to the love of husband that a husband becomes dear, but due to the satisfaction or the need for one's own body that a husband becomes dear. Because now that you have a companion, definitely you have to take care of them, right? So that's what is meaning here. Now let's say if the Atma means mind, then the translation goes like this. It is not due to the love of a husband that a husband becomes dear, but it is due to the satisfaction of one's own minds or desires that a husband becomes dear. Because people have emotional needs, psychological needs, and in order to satisfy those psychological needs also, people seek out for a partner, right? So that's a need, that's for one's own self, that they are looking out for a partner. So that is what it means. Due to the satisfaction of one's own needs that a husband becomes dear. For example, when people are young and they want to get married, they have all these requirements, like what are they looking in other partner? He should have a black hair, like a white color eyes, fair complexion, thin, whatever, right? Everybody has their own vision of what is an ideal partner, right? But let's say that's also a requirement, that's also a need. But let's say someone is 35 years old or 40 years old and he's still not getting married, then sometimes people reduce their expectations. You know what, maybe not necessarily a black hair, but I'm okay with, little bit, right? They reduce expectations. Or at certain point they say that, you know what, even if it's just a woman, that's all right, I'm just going to get married because it's getting too late, You see, because I need a partner, right? So it's ultimately for one's own self that, someone is seeking out for a partner, right? So it's like that. And now if you take the example, the translation as Atma as the soul, then it goes like this. It is not due to the love of a husband that a husband becomes dear, but due to the satisfactions of one's own soul that husband becomes dear. Just like in the Vedic society, there are this dharma, artha, kama and moksha, right? All the 5 purusharthas. And whoever is following the strict Vedic, this lifestyle, they're interested in all those things. Ultimately, it's a moksha, liberation is also required. So for the liberation, one has to do all the ritualistic ceremonies and all those things, right? So for them, even though they're not grossly looking out for some material sense gratification, but even for liberation, people have some self-interest in seeking out for some partner. And if the translation of the Atma is super soul, then the translation goes like this. It is not due to the love of a husband that a husband becomes dear, but it is due to the love of God that husband becomes dear, right? So for example, we all devotees, right? So we all devotees, we all realize that everybody is Krishna's part and parcel, right? So that's how we relate to each other. If we love Krishna, then definitely we have to love all his, all the living entities as well, because we are all related through Krishna, right? So if we are loving Krishna, that means that we also have to love each and every living entity. So in that sense, everybody becomes dear to us because they are part and parcel of Krishna. So that is also an understanding that why people become dear to us. Now, based upon the meaning of what Atma or what oneself means, it can have different interpretations and different meanings over here. That is why, but however, the ultimate understanding or the ultimate satisfaction one gets is not through identifying with one's body or mind, but through identifying one as spirit soul, as not as one is gross body. That is why Yajnavalkya says, Atmanova drashtena shravanena matya vijnanendam shravanam viditam. Hence, dear Maitreyi, the self, here the self means Atma, should be investigated, heard, contemplated and meditated upon. If we do so, everything becomes known by such process. Because if we are looking for satisfaction, if you are looking for one's own satisfaction, that ultimate satisfaction only comes when one's self-interest is not for the body or mind, but for one's own soul. So that is the instruction given by sage Yajnavalkya to his wife Maitreyi. Now, if we go back to the current verse, if it is said here, but an attached family man wants his family members to carry him in great procession even after his death, and although he will not be able to see how the procession goes, he still desires that his body be taken gorgeously in procession. You see, there is a preeti, there is some attraction even for one's own body. That attraction is so strong that a person is worried about his body even after his death. That he wants his body to be nicely decorated even after his death. So that shows how one's deep preeti towards one's body is so strong that a person doesn't care even after death. He's still worried about his body. So the ultimate thing is actually preeti, because that is what Jiva Goswami explains in Preeti Sandarbha, that how is preeti greater than moksha. Because people think that moksha is the highest thing, but Jiva Goswami says that no, it is not moksha, it is actually the preeti which is the highest thing. I'll give you one small example. Let's say that a person is working very hard to earn money, right? He is working very hard every day and he's trying to save money, thinking that at one point of time, at certain time he'll be able to retire and he doesn't need to work anymore and he will enjoy his life, right? That's like liberation, retirement. Retirement is like a liberation for that person, right? So let's say that a person goes to retirement and he has enough money in savings and he no longer needs to work hard, and he's enjoying his life. But what do people do after retirement? Do they just simply sit quietly? No, not always. People still do something. They do something what they like to do, right? Sometimes you go to Hawaii. In the Hawaii you can see all the retired people living over there. It's just in the nature, just enjoying, right? No, right? Yeah, they play golf, or sometimes they even start some small business or some part-time thing. They work again. I mean, previously you are also working, but you hated your work, and now you retired. Again, after retirement also you are still working. Of course, now you are working for what you like, right? So that is the thing. Ultimately, what we are looking for is not liberation. Ultimately, what we are looking for is preeti, love. Because let's say for a person loves his work, he will never retire. He will keep on working. I know one of my boss. He was like 75 or 80. He still used to come to the office. I mean, he has enough money, but he doesn't care because he loves what he's doing. So ultimately, what matters is love. Ultimately, what matters is that you need to love what you're doing. Ultimately, what matters is that preeti. It's a strong attraction one has upon oneself, that why a person is motivated to do anything. That is why Jiva Goswami says preeti is more important than moksha. That is why he wrote Preeti Sandarbha. He did not write Moksha Sandarbha. He wrote Preeti Sandarbha, right? So, and this self, now it depends. When you say self, Atma, what are you identifying? What do you mean by yourself? Are you identifying with your body? Or are you identifying with your mind? Or are you identifying with your soul? Because if you look at in the Bhagavad Gita also, Arjuna also had the same problem. He does not want to fight, right? And he says that how can I kill my own teachers, fathers, sons, grandfathers, maternal uncles, father-in-law, right? So he says that, it is better to live by begging, actually. I mean, he was shameless in one sense that he wants to even beg, that he doesn't care, even though he's a Kshatriya, he doesn't mind. So apparently it looks like, Arjuna is being compassionate on others, but actually in reality, if you see, he says my teacher and my father and my sons. Basically that is nothing but an extended self. You see what I'm saying? Because let's say that a person becomes a husband or a parent, and let's say the wife passes away or the son passes away, then who will call him husband any longer? No, nobody's going to call him that. Right? I mean, that is what a person means. Let's say, who is Arjuna? Who are you? Means Arjuna. Who are you? Means who are you? Who are you? I am a father. I'm a husband. I'm an uncle. Right? Those are all identities, designations. This is which defines who we are. And let's say one of those identity is gone, then we feel that we are lost. You see? Because if the wife is not there, then who is going to call you husband? That means that identity of you as a husband is lost. Then you think that you are lost. Actually, you are not lost. That identity is lost. Because you are thinking that you are that identity, then you feel you are lost. Right? Because that you think that you are that self. Because you are identifying with your relationships, and that is what is defining you. So in this way, people get into this identification with one's own body, and even though they are not treated properly with respect, and even though their own family members neglect, but that is what is defining who they, that is what is giving definition of who they are. And they don't want to lose that, and they have a strong attachment to those relationships, and that is why they still stay in the same house, even though they are neglected. And this self being the ultimate object of satisfaction, this is also discussed in Brahma Vimohan Lila, in the 10th canto. We all know the pastime when Lord Brahma, he steals all the calves and the gopas, right? And Krishna expands himself into the calves and gopas for a certain period of time. And it is said that during that time, actually all the cows felt even more affection towards its calves than they experienced it before. And all the mothers felt even more love towards their children than before. And Maharaj Parikshit asks that, how can coward women have developed for Krishna someone else's son, such an unprecedented pure love? Love they never felt even for their own children. Because now it's not, actually they are feeling that it is their own son, but actually it's not their own son. It's actually Krishna expanded as their own son. And now they are feeling even more love. Right? And that is where Maharaj Parikshit is asking that how is it that these people are feeling such a love to their own sons, so much more than what they experienced before. And Sukadeva Goswami replies, he says, O king, for every created being, the dearmost thing is certainly his own self. The dearness of everything else, children, wealth and so on, it is due only to the dearness of the self. So this is exactly what sage Yajnavalkya told to his wife Maitreyi. The same thing Sukadeva Goswami is also telling in the 10th canto, Brahma Vimohan Lila. For this reason, O best of kings, the embodied soul is self-centered. He is more attached to his own body and self than to his so-called possessions like children, wealth and home. Indeed, for persons who think the body is a self, O best of the kings, those things whose importance lies only in their relationship to the body are never as dear as the body itself. You see, if a person comes to the stage of considering the body as mine instead of me, he will certainly not consider the body as dear as his self. After all, even as the body is growing old and useless, one's desire to continue living remains strong. You see, because it is the same thing. Once even the body is growing old and useless, one's desire to continue living remains strong. The reason is because ultimately everything a person is doing is to trying to satisfy one's own self. And that self, the identity of self doesn't lose, even if you're losing the body. That still remains very strong. Now the conclusion is that therefore it is his own self that is most dear to every embodied living entity, and it is simply for the satisfaction of this self the whole material creation of moving and non-moving entities exists. You should know that Krishna to be the original soul of all living entities. So this instruction is for the devotees. Because even for the devotees, that strong desire for a self still remains. But how a devotee looks is that you should know, this is for the devotee instruction, you should know Krishna to be the original soul of all living entities. For the benefit of whole universe, he has, out of his causeless mercy, appeared as an extraordinary human being. He has done this by the strength of his own internal potency. So ultimately, what he's telling here is that even though when we say self, ultimately Krishna is the Paramatma, is situated in everybody's heart. You see? So that is why even a devotee, when he feels this preeti for oneself, it is actually the preeti for the Lord who is situated in one's own heart, that he becomes, Atma Kamaya or Atma Preeti. Those in the world who understand Lord Krishna as he is, see all things, whether stationary or moving, as manifest forms of Supreme Personality of Godhead, such enlightened persons recognize no reality apart from the Supreme Lord Krishna. And that is where there is a verse which says that you should know the Krishna to be the original soul of all living entities. And in this way, the original unmanifested form of the material nature is the source of all material things, and the source of even the subtle material nature is the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. What then could one ascertain to be separate from him? Because see, ultimately we must understand that there is, the devotee's vision is that actually, ultimately there is nothing which is other than Krishna, or there is nothing, there is no creation or there is no entity where Krishna is not part of. Because Lord Krishna as a Paramatma is situated in everybody's heart, including one's own heart, right? So in this way, a devotee's vision is that he does not see anything other than Krishna. And whatever preeti one has, that preeti is developed not due to identifying with one's own body or soul, body or mind, but it is identifying or seeing Krishna, or having the vision to be able to see Krishna in everybody's self, including oneself. So only such a person will be able to achieve the ultimate preeti. As Chandidas says, there is a composition by Chandidas. Chandidas, does anyone know who is Chandidas? He's actually one of the favorite, Lord Chaitanya's favorite composer of songs. Lord Chaitanya used to like few devotees composing songs, and one of Chandidas is one of his favorite. Right. Correct, yes, exactly. So, and this is Chandidas' poem, where he says, Priti Baliya e tina akhara, e tina bhuvanasara, e moramana haya rati thina, ivāharan nahi ara. These three syllables, Priti, love, are the essence of the three planetary systems. They remain in my mind day and night. I think of nothing but them. You see, this is the ultimate Priti. So it's the same thing, Atma Kamaya or Atma Priti. And this is how a devotee envisions the Priti. And he says, Krishnam enam avehitvam atmanam akhilatmanam. That you should know Krishna to be the original soul of all living entities. So anyway, so this is basically an explanation of the current verse, basically, where it says that thus he remains at home just like a pet dog and eats whatever is so negligently given to him, afflicted with so many diseases such as dyspepsia and loss of appetite. He eats only very small morsels of food and becomes invalid, who cannot work anymore. And this person is still attached. That means that there is some preeti in this person's heart, that he is still continuing his life with his attachment to his family members. But however, a devotee's preeti, for a devotee also there is preeti, but that preeti is not on the platform of body and mind, but it is seeing Krishna in everybody's heart. Any questions or comments? Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is true. Yeah. That. Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. I can repeat what you just told me. So here basically it is this verse, and the purport is basically encouraging an old person to leave the home. Right? That is instruction. That's a clear instruction. But now let's say somebody wants to follow this instruction and leaves a home, who's going to take care of them, right? I mean, you need to have money, you need to have friends or family members to take care of a person because he's old, he's ill, right? It's not practical. Basically, what we are trying to say is that it's not practical, the recommendation given here, right? But see, my explanation here would be, see, this is an example these are all examples. And this example is given probably like thousands of years back, right? And probably during that time, the society is in such a way that a sannyasi is taken care properly. The society is designed in such a way that a person can be taken care. He doesn't need to worry that he will be fed. But now that's not the situation. I mean, just like the dog example, but now the dog is not like that. The dogs are much more luxurious, right? So some of these things may not be applicable right now if you want to practically implement it. But the point over here is that trying to understand the principle. The principle here is a material attachment one has to give up. That's the whole point. But if someone wants to do this, definitely it is not practical, because who's going to take care of you? You need money, you need insurance, you need all these things, right? So yeah, I mean, definitely. It's just a limitation of an example. This is just an example given.
Yeah, another aspect is, people in the culture when this was spoken, they weren't concerned about being looked after. They're leading to give up the body.
That is true.
Like the Pandavas, when they realized Krishna's left, they just headed north, and
Right.
Vidura talked Dhritarashtra into it. He wasn't going to set up someplace else. Just leave the body.
Yeah, he left the body.
Get out of that embarrassing situation and leave your body.
That is true. Yeah, it's easy for them to do it because, they know what to do. And, the society is also supporting such a situation. And also, even they are also like, even Dhritarashtra, he performed mystic yoga. I mean, that means that the people already know all those things way back in the days, like, how to take care of one's own body, even without eating for so many days, right? But now we cannot do that. Every 4 hours we get hungry, right? Yeah.
We see some examples of advanced devotees who, their family attachment is amongst other devotees, but still they want to be detached from family life, like Queen Kunti, her whole family is devotees, but she's saying, please let me become detached from this family life.
Right.
So why is that? Why is that still a kind of obstacle or hindrance if your attachments are to devotees?
See, the thing is that whenever we talk about those examples, we must understand that that is a time when the varnashrama dharma is still very strong. And even though a person is transcendental, they still respect the varnashrama dharmas. Just for example, in the first canto of Bhagavatam also, when you see Sukadeva Goswami walked naked and all the other naked women covering their body, and so when Vyasa was coming, they covered the body, right? So it is said in the purport that it doesn't mean that Vyasa is not transcendental. No, Vyasa is also transcendental, but because it's in the grihastha ashram, he wants to respect the rules and regulations a grihastha should be following, right? So that is why the ladies act in such a way. So these examples are coming from a time where the people even consider varnashrama dharma, they protect it and they respect the principles. So that is why when a person is husband or a person is wife, they still try to keep up those obligations, social obligations intact. Okay, thank you very much. In the Srimad Bhagavatam Gita, Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.